If you're here, old photographs haunt you too. This is Behind the Photo. Subscribe, leave a like, and tell me in the comments whether you believe a photograph can hold the memory of the one in it. Now, dim the lights. Enjoy the watch.
Between 1905 and 1909, a woman named Nora Greel cured 63 patients in a small community in Arkansas. Not one of them died. Not one of them failed to recover. Fever, consumption, infected wounds, conditions that the county physician had given up on, Nora Greel touched them and they recovered. Her record was perfect. The families wrote letters. They wrote to relatives in other counties, describing the miracle of recovery. Those letters survived by accident, in estate sales, in donated archives, in boxes that no one opened for decades. When a physician named Dr. Alton Cross collected them in 1909, he noticed something that no single family had noticed on their own. Every letter described the same thing. The recovered were not quite themselves afterward. Not ill, not visibly different, just not quite who they had been before Nora Greel touched them. The way a person looks the same in a photograph and different in a room. Something present before, gone. Something not present before, there. Dr. Cross spent 4 months in Cutter's Crossing documenting what he found. His report was rejected by the Arkansas Medical Association without comment. 3 journals refused it. He published it himself in a pamphlet so rare that fewer than a dozen copies are known to exist. We have one. Tonight, we read it. 63 people were healed by one woman's hands in Cutter's Crossing, Arkansas, between 1905 and 1909. Not one of them was the same person afterward. They recovered completely. Their fevers broke. Their wounds closed. Their lungs cleared. The conditions that had been killing them stopped killing them. By every medical measure available to a county physician in rural Arkansas in the first decade of the 20th century, they were well. They were healed. They were alive when they should, by every reasonable expectation, have been dead. But the letters their families wrote, letters to cousins in Fort Smith, to sisters in Little Rock, to brothers who had moved to Memphis, described something that no single letter writer seemed to find alarming on its own, because each of them was describing only one person, only one recovery, only one set of small and difficult-to-name changes. It was only when a physician named Dr. Alton Cross read all of the letters together, in sequence, in the summer of 1909, that the pattern became visible. The recovered were not quite themselves, not ill, not diminished, not frightened or unhappy, or in any obvious distress. Just not quite the person they had been before Nora Greel touched them. The way a piece of music sounds the same when you play the notes and different when something essential has been removed from the performance. All the notes present, something gone. I located Dr. Cross's pamphlet in the Special Collections Room of the University of Arkansas Library in Fayetteville. It was cataloged under Medical Curiosities, Arkansas, 1910. The catalog card had not been touched since 1962. The pamphlet is 41 pages, printed on paper that is gone the color of old bone, in type that is slightly uneven, in the way of documents printed on a small private press by someone who was not a printer by trade. I read it in the library. I was not permitted to photograph it. I took notes by hand. What follows is drawn from those notes, and from the letters Dr. Cross collected, and from the few other documents that touch on the case of Nora Greel and the community of Cutter's Crossing. Cutter's Crossing was a community of approximately 200 people in the river bottomland of what is now Yell County, Arkansas, about 40 miles west of Little Rock by road. In 1905, when the events described in this account began, it consisted of a general store, a Baptist church, a one-room school, a cotton gin, and the scattered farms and homesteads of families that had been working the land in that bend of the Forche-Lefave River since Reconstruction. The 1900 federal census, which is real, and which is available through the Arkansas State Archives in Little Rock, lists the population of the Cutters Crossing Precinct as 211, with the dominant occupations being farming, timber work, and domestic service. It was, by every available measure, an ordinary rural Arkansas community in the early years of the 20th century. Ordinary poverty, ordinary hardship, ordinary rates of disease and death, which in the river bottomlands of Arkansas in 1905 meant malaria, typhoid, tuberculosis, and the various infections and complications that followed injury and childbirth. In communities where a physician might be a day's ride away, and medical supplies were whatever the general store happened to stock. The county physician for that district was a man named Dr. Emmett Voss, age 51, who practiced out of the town of Danville, 12 miles north of Cutters Crossing. Voss made rounds through the outlying communities when summoned, which was not often, because the summoning required a rider and a day's round trip, and a fee that most families preferred to avoid if there was any alternative. He was, by the account he gave to Dr. Cross in 1909, a competent physician doing the best a competent physician could do in conditions that made competence largely irrelevant. People got sick. Some recovered. Some did not. The ones who did not were buried in the Baptist churchyard, and the ones who recovered went back to work, and the cycle continued. Nora Greel arrived in Cutters Crossing in the spring of 1904. She was approximately 35 years old. She came from somewhere east, she told different people, different places, and no consistent origin story appears in any document. She was unmarried. She had no family in the community. She rented a small house on the edge of the settlement from a farmer named Elias Boatwright, and she made herself useful in the quiet ways that a capable single woman makes herself useful in a community that has learned not to ask too many questions about where people come from. She cooked. She sewed. She helped with harvests. She sat with the sick. That last capacity, sitting with the sick, was the one that first established her reputation. In communities where a doctor was expensive and distant, a woman who would come to a sick person's bedside and remain there through a difficult night was a valued resource, and Nora Greel was apparently very good at it. She was calm. She was patient. She brought tinctures and poultices that she prepared herself from plants she gathered in the bottomland and the hills above it. She knew which fevers required cold cloths and which required warmth. She knew, or appeared to know, what a body needed before the body knew it. Her first documented cure, documented because the family wrote a letter about it that Dr. Cross later obtained, was a child named Willie Pratt, age 7, who had been suffering from typhoid fever for 11 days in August of 1905. Dr. Voss had visited twice and had told the family, with the particular gentleness that physicians reserve for irreversible situations, that the child was not likely to survive. The family sent for Nora Greel. She came. She sat with the child for 3 days and 2 nights, leaving only briefly, and returning each time with something new. A preparation, a compress, a tea made from things she had gathered that morning. On the morning of the 4th day, Willie Pratt's fever broke. By the end of the week, he was sitting up. By the end of the month, he was back in the yard. Dr. Voss, when he visited again, examined the child and said nothing to the family about how the recovery had been achieved. He wrote in his case notes, which Dr. Cross obtained in 1909, a single line. Child recovered. Cause uncertain. Willie Pratt was 7 years old when Nora Greel healed him. He was alive and healthy for the rest of the account. His mother, in a letter to a sister in Russellville, written 3 months after the recovery, described him as well and growing and eating well. She also wrote, "He is not quite Willie anymore. I cannot explain it better than that. He is well. He is happy. He does not seem troubled. But there is something about him that is different from before he was sick. And I have looked, and I cannot find what it is. I thought at first it was just that he had been close to death, and that changes a child. But my neighbor's boy was close to death 2 years ago with the same fever, and came back himself. Willie came back, but not quite himself. I do not know what Nora Greel did. I am grateful she did it. I just wish I knew what it was." This letter, written in September of 1905, is the first documented expression of what would become, over the following 4 years, a consistent and inexplicable pattern across 62 additional cases. The cures continued. Between 1905 and 1909, Nora Greel treated, by Dr. Cross's count, based on the letters and interviews he conducted in the community, 63 patients. The conditions treated ranged from the serious to the apparently hopeless: malaria, typhoid, tuberculosis, blood poisoning following farm injuries, childbed fever, a case of what Dr. Voss had diagnosed as advanced cancer of the stomach. Every patient recovered. Not one died. Not one failed to improve. The letters that documented these recoveries were written by people who had no reason to coordinate their accounts and every reason to simply describe what they had witnessed. They were written to sisters, to cousins, to brothers who had moved away. Private communications, not intended for any audience beyond the recipient. The fact that they all described the same phenomenon was not something any of the letter writers could have known, because no single letter writer had read any of the others. A farmer named Josiah Prewitt wrote to his brother in Fort Smith in March of 1907, 3 weeks after his wife had been treated by Nora Greel for typhoid. "Margaret is well, better than well. She is up and working and eating full meals, which the doctor said was impossible 2 weeks ago. I am grateful beyond words, but I want to tell you something, and I want you not to think me foolish for saying it. Margaret is not quite Margaret. She looks the same. She sounds the same. She says the same things she would always say. But when I sit across from her at supper, I have the feeling I am sitting across from someone who has studied Margaret very carefully and is doing an excellent job of being her. I cannot explain it. I have not told her this. She seems happy. Maybe I am the one who is wrong." A schoolteacher named Louise Aldridge wrote to her sister in Little Rock in June of 1908, 6 weeks after her recovery from a lung infection, "I am well. I am fully well. The cough is gone completely, and Dr. Voss says my lungs are clear. I should be happy, and I think I am. But I have noticed something that I want to describe to you, because you know me better than anyone, and you will be able to tell me if I am imagining it. Before I was sick, I cared about things. Not in a dramatic way. Just the ordinary caring that makes a life feel like yours. I cared about my students. I cared about my garden. I cared about whether the light was good in the morning and whether the bread rose properly. I still do all of those things. I tend the garden. I teach my students. I bake the bread. But the caring has a different quality now. It is like the difference between playing a song and hearing a recording of yourself playing the song. The notes are all there. Something is not. Dr. Voss was aware of Nora Greel's work from early on. It was impossible, in a community of 200 people, to be unaware of it. And his response was consistent throughout: professional skepticism, official silence, and private unease. He told Dr. Cross in 1909 that he had considered reporting Greel to the state medical board for practicing medicine without a license, but had decided against it on the grounds that whatever she was doing was working, and that removing her from the community would have left 63 people dead or dying. He said this without apparent irony. He also said, "I examined several of her patients after their recoveries thoroughly, with the full set of instruments I carry. In each case, I found the body in perfect health. Better than perfect health, if that is a meaningful statement. The kind of health you see in a young person who has never been ill, not in a person who was near death 6 weeks ago. The recovery was not just complete. It was as though the illness had been removed so thoroughly that no trace of it remained. No weakness, no residual damage, nothing." He paused. This is noted in Cross's transcription of the interview, and then said, "That is not how bodies work. When a body fights a serious illness and wins, it remembers the fight. You can see it in the tissue, in the constitution, in the way a person carries themselves. These people showed none of that. They were not survivors of illness. They were people who had never been ill. The illness had been," he searched for the right word, "extracted, removed, as though it had been lifted out and something else put in its place." Cross asked what he meant by something else. Voss said, "I don't know, nothing I can identify. But when I examined them, I had the persistent feeling that I was examining someone I had met before, and finding that the person had been replaced by a very good copy. Everything correct, everything in order, and something gone that I could not name or locate." This detail stopped me when I read it in Cross's pamphlet. A physician with 30 years of practice, describing his patients as very good copies of themselves. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. Dr. Alton Cross arrived in Cutter's Crossing in June of 1909. He was 43 years old, a physician who had trained at the University of Arkansas Medical School in Little Rock, and who had spent 15 years in general practice before developing what he described, in the introduction to his pamphlet, as an interest in cases that lie at the boundary between medicine and whatever lies beyond medicine. He had heard about Nora Greel from a colleague, who had heard about her from a patient who had family in Yell County. The description he received was simple: a woman in a small Arkansas community who had cured everything she touched for 4 years, with no medical training, no equipment, and no failures. He arrived expecting to find a combination of natural remedies and the placebo effect of a confident healer operating in an isolated community. He found something he could not explain. He spent his first 2 weeks interviewing the families of the cured. He collected 27 letters, of which he reprints excerpts in the pamphlet. He spoke with Dr. Voss. He spoke with neighbors, with the Baptist minister, with the storekeeper, who served as the community's informal record keeper. He built a picture of Nora Greel's 4 years in Cutter's Crossing that was consistent in every particular: the perfect record, the impossible recoveries, the family's uneasy gratitude. He spent his first 2 weeks interviewing the families of the cured. He collected 27 letters, of which he reprints excerpts in the pamphlet. He spoke with Dr. Voss. He spoke with neighbors, with the Baptist minister, with the storekeeper, who served as the community's informal record keeper. He built a picture of Nora Greel's 4 years in Cutter's Crossing that was consistent in every particular: the perfect record, the impossible recoveries, the family's uneasy gratitude. The Baptist minister, a man named Reverend Thomas Clary, age 62, told Cross that he had prayed on the matter of Nora Greel for 4 years and had not arrived at an answer that satisfied him. He said, "I know what the Bible says about healers. I know what the congregation expects me to say, which is that God works through instruments and that Nora Greel is one of his instruments. I have said this from the pulpit. I believe it is possible. But I have examined my conscience for 4 years about whether I actually believe it, and the honest answer is that I do not know. What God does leaves a trace of God. When Jesus healed the lepers were grateful, and the gratitude was complete, and they were themselves in their gratitude. The people Nora Greel heals are grateful, but their gratitude, like everything else about them now, has a quality I cannot name, except to say that it is the gratitude of a very good portrait of a grateful person, not the gratitude of the person themselves." Cross asked the minister whether he had discussed this with any of the recovered. Clary said, "I have tried. They look at me with complete patience and complete incomprehension. They do not understand what I am describing. They know they are grateful. They perform the gratitude perfectly. They have simply lost access to whatever it was that made the performance feel real from the inside." The storekeeper, a man named Earl Cutter, whose family name the community bore, told Cross that he had watched Nora Greel's 4 years in the community with the particular attention of a person who makes his living observing the people around him. He said he had noticed the first change within a week of Willie Pratt's recovery, though he had not understood at the time what he was noticing. He had simply thought the child seemed unusually calm for a 7-year-old who had recently been near death. He had noticed the same quality in each subsequent recovery and had, over 4 years, developed a name for it that he offered to Cross with the apology of a man who is not accustomed to speaking in abstractions. He said, "I call it the smoothing. Like a piece of wood that's been worked down with a very fine plane until all the grain is gone. The wood is still there. It's still the same piece. But the thing that made it that particular piece of wood, the particular pattern of it, the particular way it caught the light, that's gone. They're smooth now, all 63 of them. Very nice, very even, very smooth." And then he said, in the matter-of-fact tone of a man reporting a weather observation, "I think she took it. Whatever it is. I think she took it and put it somewhere, and that somewhere is not here." And then he spoke with the cured themselves. This section of the pamphlet is the one that the 3 journals refused to publish. Cross is careful to note this. He says that all 3 rejection letters cited the same concern, which was that the account of the interviews with the cured patients contained material that was not consistent with any known medical or psychological framework, and that publishing it would be harmful to the journal's reputation for scientific rigor. He published it anyway. The interviews with the cured, conducted individually over the course of 6 weeks in the summer of 1909, revealed the following. The cured did not remember being ill. This was, Cross notes, not unusual. Serious illness often disrupts memory, and the period of highest fever or greatest pain is frequently lost to conscious recall. What was unusual was that the cured did not remember the period before the illness either. Not in a dramatic way. They remembered their names, their families, their histories, the events of their lives. But they remembered these things the way a person remembers a book they have read, not the way a person remembers their own experience. The memories were present, but not inhabited. They knew what they had done and felt and wanted before the illness. They did not feel it anymore. A woman named Cecilia Marsh, age 34, who had been treated by Nora Greel for childbed fever in 1907, told Cross, "I remember everything about my life before I was sick. I remember my childhood, my marriage, the birth of my first child. I remember it all perfectly. It's like remembering a story someone told me about a person very much like myself. I know it happened to me. I just don't feel that it did." Cross asked her whether she was unhappy about this. She thought about it for a long time. She said, "No, that's the strangest part. I'm not unhappy. I'm not anything I was before, in a way. I'm not unhappy. And I'm not happy in the way I used to be happy. I'm just here, present, functioning. My husband says I'm the same as I always was. My children don't notice anything different. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm exactly the same and I just can't feel it." She paused. She said, "But I remember what it felt like to be me before. And this doesn't feel like that." Cross interviewed 21 of the 63 cured patients. All 21 described, in varying language and with varying degrees of articulateness, the same experience. The memories intact but not inhabited. The emotions present but not felt. The sense of being a very accurate version of themselves rather than themselves. Not one of them was unhappy. Not one of them wanted anything to change. Not one of them, when Cross asked whether they had spoken to Nora Greel about what they were experiencing, had done so. When he asked why not, they gave the same answer, in different words. There was nothing to say to her. She had cured them. They were well. What would the complaint be? Cross attempted to interview Nora Greel directly in July of 1909. He visited her house on 3 occasions. On the first 2 occasions, she was not present. Or rather, she appeared to be present, since a light was visible in the window, and he could hear movement inside, but she did not answer the door. On the 3rd occasion, she opened the door. She was, Cross writes, a woman of perhaps 35 to 45 years of age, of medium height, with light brown hair and gray eyes, and a face that he found, initially, entirely ordinary. He introduced himself. He told her he was a physician researching her methods. He asked whether she would be willing to speak with him. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I help people get well. That's all I do." Cross asked what methods she used. She said, "Whatever is needed." He asked whether she would be willing to explain her methods more specifically. She said, "You've spoken to the people I've helped. You've spoken to Dr. Voss. You've read the letters. You know what I do. You're asking me to tell you something different from what you already know. And I can't do that, because there isn't anything different to tell." Cross asked her directly. He notes that he had decided, by this point, that indirect questions were not going to produce useful answers. Whether she was aware that her patients described feeling different after their recoveries. Whether she was aware of the quality that her patients described as being a copy of themselves. Nora Greel looked at him. Cross writes that her expression did not change, not because she was controlling it, but because it had settled into a state of such complete stillness that the ordinary fluctuations of human expression simply did not apply to it. He describes this stillness as the most unsettling thing he encountered in 4 months in Cutter's Crossing, which is a significant statement from a man who had spent those months interviewing people who felt like copies of themselves. She said, "They are well. They are alive. They are with their families, whatever they lost. If they lost anything, they lost something they can live without. The alternative was death." Cross asked who had given her the ability to make that exchange. She said, "I found it. He asked where. She said, "In the place where such things are kept." She closed the door. Cross did not speak to her again. 3 weeks after this conversation, in August of 1909, Nora Greel left Cutter's Crossing. She packed what she had brought, which was not much, by the account of Elias Boatwright, who helped her load a single trunk onto a wagon, and she left in the direction of the river. No one saw her arrive anywhere. No further record of a Nora Greel appears in any Arkansas document, any census, any deed, any death record from 1909 onward. She arrived in Cutter's Crossing with a single trunk. She left with a single trunk. She left behind 63 people who were alive and well, and not quite themselves, and a community that had decided, collectively and without discussion, that the exchange was acceptable. Cross submitted his pamphlet to the Arkansas Medical Association in October of 1909. The rejection was immediate. He submitted it to the American Journal of Medicine, to the Journal of the American Medical Association, and to a regional medical publication in Memphis. All three rejected it. He printed 400 copies at a press in Little Rock and distributed them himself, by mail and by hand, to physicians, libraries, and medical schools across the South. I found one of those 400 copies in Fayetteville. The catalog records suggest that perhaps 11 others have been located in various archives over the past century. The rest are lost, or were never received, or were received and discarded, or are sitting in boxes in attics and estate collections waiting for someone to open them. The 63 cured patients of Cutter's Crossing grew old. They married, had children, farmed their land, attended the Baptist church, and lived the ordinary lives of ordinary people in rural Arkansas through the first half of the 20th century. Their children, by the account of the few descendants who have been located and interviewed by researchers who stumbled onto this case, were normal, fully themselves, fully present, fully inhabiting their own experience. Whatever Nora Greel had removed from her patients, it did not pass to the next generation. The community of Cutter's Crossing itself ceased to exist as a named place sometime in the 1950s. The families dispersed as rural Arkansas communities dispersed in those decades, pulled toward the cities by the same forces that emptied out the bottomland communities across the South after the war. The Baptist church stood until 1963, when it collapsed in a flood. The general store closed in 1948. The cotton gin burned in 1951. The land returned to bottomland, and the Fourche Lefebvre River rearranged itself over the decades in the way that rivers in flat country rearrange themselves. And the specific bend where Cutter's Crossing had stood is now, depending on the season, either partially submerged or a tangle of river willows and sedge-grass with no visible indication that 200 people once lived and worked and were healed there. I contacted the Yell County Historical Society in Dardanelle. They have a file on Cutter's Crossing, one of the standard community history files that local historical societies maintain, consisting of census records, church registers, and a handful of photographs. The file contains no mention of Nora Greel. I asked the archivist whether this seemed unusual, given that Cross's pamphlet describes her as a significant presence in the community for 4 years. The archivist said, "Communities remember what they want to remember. Sometimes what they don't want to remember just goes." She used the word goes without apparent awareness of how precisely it described what Nora Greel had done to 63 people. The last surviving documented connection to the case is a letter written in 1941 by a woman named Ida Prewitt, who was the daughter-in-law of Josiah Prewitt, the farmer who had written to his brother in Fort Smith about Margaret not being quite Margaret. Ida Prewitt wrote the letter to her own daughter, who was leaving Arkansas for California, and it is preserved in a private collection that a researcher named Patricia Alcott was given access to in 2011. Alcott published a brief academic note about it in a folklore journal in 2013. I found the note. I found Alcott. She sent me a transcript of the letter. Ida Prewitt wrote, "Your grandmother Margaret, who died before you were born, was healed by a woman named Nora Greel when she was very sick in 1907. I want you to know this because it is part of our family history, and because your grandfather Josiah left a note in his Bible about it that I think you should know about." The note says, "Margaret was healed, but not returned. What Nora Greel gave back was not everything she took. I have loved the woman who came back, but I have spent 30 years grieving the woman who left." Josiah Prewitt died in 1938. His note in his Bible is the most direct statement any person connected to this case ever made about what Nora Greel's healing cost. Margaret was healed but not returned. 30 years of grieving the woman who left, while loving the woman who came back. The question that Cross could not answer, that no one has answered in the 115 years since he printed his pamphlet, is what she removed. What the thing was that Cecilia Marsh described as what it felt like to be me. What the quality was that Dr. Voss recognized as missing when he examined the recovered bodies and found them perfect in every way except that they felt like copies. She said she found it in the place where such things are kept. What place? What things? What exchange she was making? 63 times with 63 people, taking something from each of them and giving them their lives in return. Cross, in the pamphlet, attempts to address this question with the tools available to him. He considers the possibility that Greel was practicing a form of hypnosis or suggestive therapy, a genuine medical modality in 1909, associated with the work of Charcot and Janet and the early Freudians, that produced the psychological flatness his patients described by suppressing the more volatile dimensions of personality. He rejects this because hypnotic suggestion does not cure typhoid or close infected wounds, or reverse the physical deterioration of tuberculosis. Whatever Greel was doing to the mind of her patients, she was also doing something to their bodies, and the something she was doing to their bodies was not psychological. He considers the possibility that the changes his patients described were the ordinary residue of serious illness, the dulling of affect that follows a brush with death, the recalibration of a personality that has been to the edge and come back. He rejects this because he interviewed survivors of serious illness who had not been treated by Greel, and none of them described the quality he was documenting. Illness changes people, Cross writes. It does not smooth them. He considers, in the last section of the pamphlet, the possibility that he is wrong, that the quality he and Dr. Voss and Reverend Clary and Earl Cutter and 21 individual patients all described is not a real phenomenon, but a shared expectation, a community mythology that has been applied retrospectively to people who were simply well and simply changed by their experience of almost dying. He considers this possibility seriously and at length, as a physician should, and then he dismisses it on the grounds that the people who noticed the change most acutely were not the community, but the patients themselves. The 21 individuals who told him, independently and in their own words, that their memories felt like records of someone else's experience. A community mythology cannot reach inside a person and change how their own history feels to them. He ends the pamphlet with a single paragraph. He writes, "I do not know what Nora Greel was. I do not know what she took from her patients, or where she took it, or what she did with it. I know that 63 people are alive who should be dead, and that something was exchanged for those lives, and that the something was taken with such precision and care that the people it was taken from do not miss it. Or rather, they miss it the way you miss a word that has left your vocabulary. You know it was there, you reach for it, and what you find in its place is a smooth surface, with no indication that anything was ever removed. That is the most precise description of what Nora Greel did that any document contains. A smooth surface, with no indication that anything was ever removed. 63 smooth surfaces. In a community in Arkansas that has been gone for 50 years, in a house that has collapsed into the bottomland, on a road that no longer bears the name Cutter's Crossing. Josiah Prewitt wrote, in the note he left in his Bible, Margaret was healed, but not returned. He loved the woman who came back for 30 years. He grieved the woman who left for 30 years. He did both simultaneously, in the same house, at the same table, in the same bed. He never told Margaret. There was no point in telling her. She would have listened with complete patience and complete incomprehension, and she would have said that she felt perfectly well, and she would have been telling the truth. She is gone. The community is gone. The pamphlet exists in perhaps a dozen copies, and somewhere, in the place where such things are kept, wherever that is, 63 portions of whatever it means to be a specific human being are stored by someone or something that has been collecting them since at least 1905, and has not, as far as any available record indicates, stopped.
Thank you for being with me until the very last second. Tell me in the comments who you would show this story to: a friend, a parent, a stranger. Someone needs it right now. And subscribe to Behind the Photo. The next frame is already developing.